Hi there, it's me again, Ben. Second episode of the video series, research projects, whatever I want to call it. No full name yet for it. Today I'm going to be covering New Hampshire and Vermont, part of the East Coast states that I'm first going to be looking at for all of the U.S. states, geographies, and a little bit of background and history for each state. Jumping right into it, we're going to start with New Hampshire. They kind of make up the upper rightmost part of the United States, right below Maine, Maine, of course. So the kind of history behind New Hampshire starts in 1623. I'm going to be looking a little bit at my notes for like the specific names because I'm not going to remember all of this stuff. So in 1623, we had Captain John Mason and Sir Ferdinand Gorges. So these two guys were granted permission by, I think it was one of the kings, to take control of all the land between the Merrimack River and the Kennebec River by the Council of New England. And the Council of New England was at the time a chartered group who was responsible for taking more control of all of the New England, or just taking control and settling in more parts of America, which was, part of King James the First's mission to control more of America. So the first permanent settlement in New Hampshire wasn't until 1629 in, I think, Dover Point, where they set up the upper plantation, which was what it was called. And that was kind of the major, I guess, hub or area of development for all the people there. And that was kind of done. But then again in 1629, Sir Ferdinand Gorges and John Mason split their friendship and therefore also split the entire land, which now makes up the border between New Hampshire and Maine. Funny fact, or interesting fact, that this border was still disputed up until the Supreme Court had its final decision in 2001 between which islands bordering these two states, or at the bottom parts of the states, would be belonging to which state. Moving right along, so New Hampshire was named after the British port of Hampton, which resides in Hampshire, England. So that's another interesting thing. Let's see. Okay, another point. So, in 1679, Massachusetts. So really up until this late 1600s, there was still a huge kind of mashing. I mean, these states were never fully border developed. That wasn't until the American Revolution where they really tried to define where these states were. So these were kind of just a mumble jumble of New England colonies, mostly dominated by Massachusetts, like we talked about in Maine yesterday. How Maine was still part of Massachusetts all the way up until 1820. So the land of New England was kind of one large thing. So there was a lot of land disputes between New Hampshire and Massachusetts, and so King Charles officially separated the two colonies in 1679, and therefore chartered his own new. I think the charter was called. No, I have it here. The charter was called. No, I know this. I mean, it was just the Charter of New Hampshire. Pretty simple. And therefore it became part of the English settlements, and it was no longer like an independently chartered settlement. It was now an English one. The only war ever fought in the Revolutionary War from the Continental Army was at Fort William and Mary in Portsmouth, the kind of the largest port that they had at the time. And this was the only battle, and it was a huge win for the Continental Army, gaining a lot of supplies from the British who were controlling this area. Modern day New Hampshire is mostly made up of smaller cities. There's no real large metropolitan city in New Hampshire, but recent developments in with highways and other forms of transportation, or at least roads to get to Massachusetts, specifically Boston, have bolstered the growth a little bit in New Hampshire, kind of urbanizing the state a little bit. Um, that's most of the interesting stuff. Uh, New Hampshire also has no sales tax, which is nice. They also have no income tax, but they make most of their state revenue from taxes on um, tobacco, gambling. You know, Business tax is huge for them, and I think like rent income. So those are their main things. Um, the capital of the capital of New Hampshire is should know this. The capital is Concord. Have it here. Um, it has a population of around 1.4 million. Capital is Concord. It's Concord, and then it also has, I think, a city called Manchester, which is the largest city in New Hampshire, and they are have a population of 110,000 or something like that. So interesting. I'm from California, so these states are kind of very small with their cities. Um, I mean, from California, we have LA, San Francisco, San Diego, Santa Barbara, Cal Poly, or San Luis Obispo. I mean, you can go all along the coast. We have all of these really large cities, Monterey, so Santa Cruz, all have huge populations compared to these states for the cities. So astonishing, interesting things, interesting facts for sure. So that's New Hampshire. Moving on to Vermont. I think Vermont's history really became interesting because of the land dispute again, but that was between the Continental, or I guess the Union. But starting off in 1609, we had Samuel Champlain, was the first European to lead an expedition into Vermont, where he named the main lake in Vermont that bordered Vermont and Canada, um, Lake Champlain, after himself, which is kind of a cool thing to do. I would love to name my own lake if I ever could discover something. And yeah, so he created also the first modern day map of Vermont. Cool stuff. Um, yeah, so basically, Vermont was under French rule up until 1763 with the Missouri Compromise. And even though the French never really had any major settlements in Vermont, they still kept it as it was a pretty crucial outpost for the lake area. So they had a big military base there, but there was never really any settlers because there was constant warfare with I think it was, what tribe was it? The Iroquois tribe. The Iroquois tribe were constantly terrorizing and raiding all of the settlements there, so no one really wanted to settle, which is kind of uncharacteristic of French settlements because most of them were pretty friendly with the Native Americans. Um, yeah, let's see. So after the 1763 New, the 1763 Missouri Compromise, or it was called the Treaty of Paris, but everything east of the Missouri River was to be succeeded by the French. So after that happened, there was a huge land grab by New Hampshire, and the governor at the time was providing grants to individuals who could cultivate the land. So he would provide land grants for people who would cultivate 5 acres within 5 years, which most people did, but a lot also were hoping simply to flip the land for profit, which started some kind of feuds, but wasn't really as big of the feud as was the fact that New York also borders Vermont. And because of this, New York was also starting to offer, survey, and sell off land. And this led to a lot of interstate competition. And so the English then decided to get involved. Just keep in mind, this is still like the 1760s, so revolution hasn't happened yet. And decided to side with New York, um, and then gave New York permission to sell and claim all this land, and made all of the grants given by the New Hampshire governors, the governor, made them all void. So I think there had been around 135 grants given by the New Hampshire government, and so all of these people were kind of enraged, and they started a militia called the Green Army Men. Let's see if that's right. Yeah, the Green Army Boys. And this militia attacked all of the New Yorkers, anyone who was trying to settle there, threatened the surveyors, and it was a lot of like terrorist and arson attacks. And it worked, driving out all of the New Yorkers. And that kind of led to the formation of this kind of unionized militia group who all lived in this Vermont area. It wasn't at the time named Vermont. And then in 1777, some of the grantors who were part of those 135, the militia people, would claim independence from New Hampshire. So they no longer belonged to this governor, but they were their own independent region. And that's kind of that. Then in 1777, when they also did that, they decided to name the state, not the state at the time, but the region or territory, New Connecticut, which only lasted for 6 months when they had another congressional meeting and decided to name it Vermont, which means Green Mountains because the Appalachian Mountain Range runs right through Vermont. Final part of interesting information was that after the American Revolution, it wasn't until 1790, so 14 years later, so they never were able to set up their own constitution and become a state in 1776. It was only 14 years later in 1790 when they would become a state, because they still technically under British legislation, and then therefore I guess U.S. legislation, they belonged to New York. And so in order to become their own state, they had to get permission from New York, which was written in the Constitution to be that way. It wasn't just like the rules that they had. And in order to do this, they also had to have a barrier divide, or a specific mapping out of the two, or of the boundary between New York and Vermont. And once they were able to do that, 1790 became its own state. And that's kind of the history. Let's see, Multiplier. I think the capital is like Multiplier. Montpelier. I'm probably looking really stupid trying to say this, but Montpelier is the capital of Vermont. Vermont is tiny. It has around 650,000 people, making it one of the small states. I think the small state is Wyoming, then Alaska, then North Dakota, and Vermont falls somewhere within that range. Let's see. Final interesting fact. Vermont is the only state with no buildings taller than 124 feet. Wow, that's tiny. That is pretty small. But other than that, I'll see you guys in the next one. It's kind of for myself, but if you're watching this, good on you. Hopefully you learned something. Bye now.